Hi everyone. Let's talk about the role of intertexting in literary adaptation. It is very central to our show this semester. We're going to talk about how we draw upon multiple cultural texts to make meaning and to make a performance come to life. First, let's just talk about intertexting, its definition, its purpose, why we do it. So, at its very elementary level, intertexting is cutting up a single text by putting other text into it. By this way, while we interrupt it, we question it. We might even have evidence that affirms it to help multiple cultural voices make meaning. And this is often considered a resisting of the linear idea of a stagnant page in print. Because when we publish printed words, we're expecting them to stay fixed. But through intertexting, through moving other voices into them, we give them new meanings. We question them. We often have a resistant, different kind of message that can emerge. One way that we intertext in modern culture is through memes. I have a couple here. One is Maria spinning in the Sound of Music movie that is often now said, "This is me not caring about something." My children have never seen the Sound of Music movie, but they do know that means I'm not caring. So that idea of like you can take something, it has a whole new meaning. Another shows one moment where Beyonce, during a Super Bowl performance, had an unflattering pose captured. Her agent asked people to stop sharing it, which only made them share it more. And the idea of like they started intertexting her into other frames. It's that idea of like in our lives, intertexting is everywhere, especially now that we have the ability to digitally alter words, movies, pictures, stills of different types of shows. They were able to give all these different meanings, cite all these different things, so they become so familiar, they take on a new identity all of their own. Now, what to think about is that nothing ever happens in a vacuum. Everything is always based on something else. We talked in our very, very first lecture about this idea that often traditions and practices form to challenge, replace, enhance, revise other practices, right? Just like the legend of La Befana in Italy is based on another civilization's goddess that Christianity was trying to replace, right? And so this idea of how do different texts overlap, change to become new texts. There is this idea of pushing back on the idea that any story is stagnant once it's printed or once it's been told, that things can always change. You're always drawing on your past understandings to understand future realities that you're going to encounter. Remember, right when I tell people about La Befana, the Christmas witch, the first thing the children in classrooms will say to me when I perform that story to little kids is, well, is she like Santa? Right? Because they're intertext and they're like, wait a minute, I thought the magical Christmas person was Santa. Who is La Befana? So that idea that nothing is ever happening in a vacuum. We're always drawing upon what we already know to make new meanings. Now, I want to talk a little bit about a mass media example that you hopefully have all seen if you watched the Super Bowl. If you had not, that's okay, I'll tell you about it. Kendrick Lamar had an iconic Super Bowl performance. And when I watched it, I could tell it was very, very meaningful, even though I didn't quite understand it at the time, all of the different references. For example, I saw that his dancers were dressed in red, white, and blue and making the American flag. I saw that there were moments where it looked like everyone was wearing prison uniforms. I saw Kendrick Lamar's protective posture with black women as he spoke back to Uncle Sam. But I didn't quite understand the reference to Squid Games and class warfare because I hadn't seen it. And I had not really thought about the oppression of conformity because I didn't know the history of how he has had to push back on that. But when somebody told me, I'm like, oh, of course, that makes sense. And so that's going to happen too. Sometimes we don't really realize that something is an intertext performance, that there's layers of meaning that it's speaking back from, until later when the pieces come together and we have more exposure. So there is this idea of, know that sometimes people will see the legend of La Befana that we're going to be performing and we just take it at face value. But by intertexting historical voices, Strenia, the goddess she's based on, we're able to have a deeper, richer, intertexted conversation with our audience about the importance of these characters that we create to believe in. Now, just a reminder that La Befana is not the only story that has intertexts that comes from different places. The folk tales, the fairy tales, the myths, the legends, all these stories we tell over and over again. We tell them because they resonate and they change over time, and we intertext them into contemporary culture in new and exciting ways. So that idea of why do we retell a story? Because that story matters. Because it teaches us something, it reflects something about us, it's something we hope for, something we need. We tell stories because they're meaningful to us in some way. Now, remember that we're always weaving together stories to make sense of others and ourselves. And throughout the semester, La Befana is going to get intertexted into your own ideas, into how you think about holiday celebrations, how you might have thought of Italy, how you might think of caretakers, how you might think of what a performance is. All of those things are going to emerge throughout the semester. And at times you'll affirm them, and sometimes you'll resist, and we can keep having dialogue and keep talking about what it means to make identity, culture, and meaning through embodying tales that have been told before and in different ways. Now remember, for this production, the primary pieces that are being intertexted with La Befana, the Christmas tale. We are, of course, combining 3 different versions of the story to make up the one that we have, but we're also infusing it with the historical presence of Strenia that inspired her and that was culturally motivated, and the biblical stories that the Christians within that time period were trying to help resonate with the people there, and how she became this way to tie traditions of the winter solstice to the Christian faith through planting the birth of Jesus at the winter solstice, at the Epiphany. So let's talk more about this as the semester goes on, but hopefully now you can see how these texts are going to be coming together to make our show.